Elias Croft had 47 seed varieties in his root cellar. 47 varieties that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Not in Norway's global seed vault. Not in the USDA system. Not anywhere. Just in his cellar and in his head. Then one evening his granddaughter found a jar with a bad seal. The moisture indicator had changed color. She didn't know how long it had been like that. Nobody did. She ran a germination test, laid out 30 kernels on wet paper towels, set a timer, and waited 48 hours to find out whether a corn variety that a man in Swain County had grown for 60 years was still alive. 14 out of 30 germinated. Not gone, but close enough to understand what close meant. A billion-dollar seed company had already come offering $200,000 for access to the collection. Elias had said no. But if that jar had stayed on the shelf one more season, the company wouldn't have needed to ask. Elias Croft kept his seeds in the dark. Not because seeds need darkness. They don't, particularly. He kept them in the dark because the root cellar under his barn was the most stable environment on his property. Constant 52 degrees, constant humidity, no light fluctuation, no temperature swings. Just the steady cool of a hillside in Haywood County, North Carolina, doing what hillsides do when you build into them rather than on top of them. He had 47 varieties down there. 47 varieties that did not exist anywhere else in the world. Not in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, which held over 1 million seed samples from 98% of the nations on Earth. Not in the USDA National Plant Germplasm System. Not in the Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa, which had been cataloging heirloom varieties since 1975. Not anywhere that any database, any catalog, any scientific institution had a record of. Just in the root cellar under Elias Croft's barn. And in Elias Croft's head, he was 79 years old. He had farmed the same 230 acres in Haywood County since he was 24, when his grandfather Clement signed the deed over to him and said, "Son, the land will tell you what it needs if you learn to listen." Elias had spent 55 years learning to listen. He was a small man, thin in the way of people who have done physical work their whole lives and burned off everything that wasn't necessary. His hands were stained and scarred and strong, in a way that had nothing to do with the gym and everything to do with 50 years of holding soil and tools and seeds. His granddaughter came in July. Her name was May Croft, 28 years old. Master's degree in environmental science from Duke, a position with a nonprofit in Asheville that worked on sustainable food systems. She had been to the farm 6 times in the past 4 years, always a long weekend, always with the slightly distracted quality of someone who is present in a place but not quite in it. She came in July because her grandfather had called her in June and said something she did not expect. He said, "I need you to come, not for a visit. I need you to come and learn something before I can't teach it anymore." Elias Croft did not ask for things. He did not say, "I need." He said what needed doing and went and did it. So when he used those words, May put down what she was doing, called her supervisor, and drove the 2 hours from Asheville to Haywood County. She arrived on a Tuesday evening to find her grandfather on the porch. Not relaxing, attending, looking at his fields the way a person looks at something they have been having a conversation with for 55 years. He told her about the seeds that first evening. Not all of it, just the number. 47 varieties, the root cellar. The fact that when he was gone, they would be gone unless someone who understood what they were took over their care. May said she understood. She said it in the voice of someone who understood the statement and not the thing behind it. Elias looked at her for a moment. He said, "Tomorrow morning, early, we start." That night May lay in her childhood bedroom and looked at the ceiling. She had a life in Asheville, work she believed in, an apartment with good light. a relationship with a man named Daniel who worked in urban planning and had sophisticated theoretical opinions about food systems, none of which he had ever tested against an actual farm. She had been to the conferences. She had read the literature. She knew the statistics about seed diversity loss. 75% of agricultural crop varieties gone in the 20th century. She had cited that number in grant applications, in conference presentations, in the introduction to her master's thesis. She had not known about her grandfather's root cellar. She had not known that the person in her own family, on the land she had grown up visiting, had been doing for 55 years what her entire professional field was trying to figure out how to do. That was a particular kind of not knowing. She lay with it until she fell asleep. The first morning started at 5. Elias was up and in the kitchen, and there was coffee. She was there, in the flannel shirt she had found in the closet from when she was 17. Standing in her grandfather's kitchen at 5 in the morning, drinking coffee that was stronger than anything she drank in Asheville. They went to the root cellar first. Trapdoor in the barn floor, iron ring, wooden door, steep stairs. The cellar itself was larger than she had imagined. Concrete walls. A single bare bulb on a pull string, and on 3 walls, floor to ceiling, wooden shelving that held hundreds of glass jars, some sealed with wax, some with rubber gaskets, some with lids replaced so many times the threads were almost worn through, each one labeled in Elias's handwriting. A small hand-printed card with a name and date, and sometimes a note. The notes in a shorthand she could not read, not a code, just the shorthand of a man who had been talking to himself about the same subject for 50 years and stopped explaining the obvious. She stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long time. "How long?" she said. "Since 1974, Elias said. The first year I understood what was happening to the varieties. What the seed companies were doing, what was being lost." He pulled a jar from the shelf, held it to the light. The seeds inside were dark, mottled, the size of small pearls. "This is the Cherokee Trail of Tears bean. This specific strain came from a family in the Smokies who maintained it since the forced march in 1838. The woman who gave it to me died in 1979. This is the only surviving line I know of with that provenance." May took the jar when he offered it. The seeds moved against the glass. "How do you know it's the only line?" "I don't," he said. "I know it's not in any database. I know it's not in Svalbard. I know the family who kept it is gone." He took the jar back carefully. "I know if I don't maintain it, it's gone." They spent 3 hours in the root cellar that first morning. He pulled jar after jar and told her what each one was, not just the botanical name and the origin. The story. The woman in Madison County who had maintained a specific October bean through 5 generations. The man in Swain County who had grown a strain of dent corn for 60 years that had adapted to the specific microclimate of his hollow and would grow nowhere else with the same vigor. The seed that came from a Cherokee elder who said, when she gave it to him, that this variety had survived longer than the United States had existed, and that the United States should be so lucky. May wrote everything down. She used all of her notebook and borrowed paper from her grandfather's kitchen drawer. She did not yet understand what she was writing. She was writing descriptions. She had not yet started writing the thing behind the descriptions, which was the living web of relationship between a farmer and 55 years of specific seeds grown in specific soil, in a specific hollow in the western mountains of North Carolina. That understanding would take longer. The town of Crabtree was the nearest settlement of any size to the Croft farm. 800 people and declining. The farm supply co-op had been there since 1947. It was the social center of the agricultural community in ways that the hardware store and the diner were not. May went with Elias on the second day. She remembered the smell from childhood, grain and mineral and motor oil, the smell of her grandfather's work. The men inside were the men who had always been inside, or their sons, or the men who had replaced them. They knew Elias, and they knew who May was, and they treated her with the courtesy that small rural communities offer to the grandchildren of people they respect. A man named Gerald Purvis was at the counter, late 50s, the build of a man who had done heavy work for a long time and had not stopped. He and Elias talked about the weather and the fence issue on their shared boundary. May stood nearby and listened. Gerald acknowledged her with a nod. "This your granddaughter? The one in Asheville?" Elias said yes. Gerald looked at May with the assessment of a man confirming a category he had already formed. "Environmental science," he said. Not a question. She told him about her work. Briefly, sustainable food systems. The nonprofit's project documenting heirloom varieties in Western Carolina. Gerald listened, then he said, "Lot of folks coming into the area lately with ideas about farming. From Asheville, from up north. Real interested in telling people how to do what their families have been doing for 100 years. May said she wasn't there to tell anyone anything. Another man at the counter, someone she didn't know, nodded at that. "Same thing every time," he said. "They come down here with their clipboards and their best practices, write their papers about us. Then they leave." Gerald didn't disagree. May stood between them and the shelves of seed and fertilizer and said nothing. She was carrying a notebook with information that both of these men did not know existed. She was the granddaughter of the most important seed keeper in this county, and neither of them knew that either. She was being categorized in the first 10 seconds of an interaction based on where she lived and what degree she had and how she was dressed. She had heard this before. Different versions, different tones. The skepticism that attached itself to educated people from cities who came to farming communities with clipboards. The skepticism was not entirely wrong. She had seen the version of herself that it was criticizing. The conference circuit environmentalists who spoke fluently about agricultural biodiversity and had never grown anything. She did not think she was that person. But she understood she had not yet been given a reason for Gerald Purvis to think otherwise, and she understood something else. What was in the root cellar under her grandfather's barn was not hers to claim yet. She had been there 2 days. She had not earned the right to say what she knew. So she said nothing and let the categorization stand and drove back to the farm with her grandfather in the early afternoon. 3 weeks later, she would have reason to think about that moment again. The learning had a shape she had not anticipated. She had expected to learn facts, variety names, growing conditions, storage requirements, information for a database. What her grandfather was teaching her was different. The first week she learned to handle seeds, not as described in the preservation literature. The way Elias practiced it. A physical knowing. He could pick up a handful of beans and tell you by touch and weight and the way they moved in his hand whether the moisture content was right, whether the variety was true to type, whether they had been stored correctly. He could look at a seed and see things she could not see yet. Shape variations that indicated genetic drift. Color patterns within range and color patterns that were not. Things not in any manual, because they were the residue of 55 years of looking at the same varieties year after year. He did not teach this by explaining it. He taught it by doing it with her there. He would pick up seeds, and she would pick up seeds, and he would say what he noticed, and she would try to notice the same thing. Fail, try again, slowly, without rushing, without any implication that she should already know this. The patience of his teaching was itself a teaching. In the second week she learned the fields. The farm had 8 sections, each different in soil character and drainage and relationship to sun and the prevailing wind off the western mountains. Elias had been matching specific varieties to specific sections for decades, and the matching was in him, not in any document. She followed him, and he talked about each section, the way you talk about something you have been in conversation with for a very long time. The northeast corner of the lower field had a specific iron content in the subsoil that certain varieties responded to in a way no other field produced. He had figured this out in 1988 when he grew the same bean variety in 6 sections and found the northeast corner's yield was 30% better, and the flavor was different in a way anyone who ate it could identify. He had grown that variety in that corner every year since. He had told no one because there was no one to tell. The co-op didn't care about the specific nutritional uptake of an heirloom bean in an iron-rich subsoil. The Extension Service cared about aggregate county yield data for approved varieties, which did not include his. The university was 3 hours away. Elias was one farmer on 230 acres with no institutional affiliation, so he had told the field. And the field had told him back, year after year, in the language of yield and flavor and growth habit. May wrote all of this down and was increasingly aware that what she was writing was insufficient. The notebook was full of facts, and the facts were true and the facts were not the thing. On the 9th day, something changed. She was in the root cellar alone. Elias was doing equipment work in the barn above. He had sent her down to check the moisture levels and record the readings in the log he kept. She was going through the shelves, checking the hygrometer, writing numbers, and she reached a jar on the 3rd shelf with writing more faded than the others. She looked at the date. She called up through the trapdoor. "Granddad, there's a jar from 1969 down here." A pause, his boots on the barn floor. He came down the stairs and looked at the jar she was pointing to. He was quiet for a moment. "That's the first one," he said. "The first one you saved?" "The first one I saved that I knew I was saving." He took the jar from the shelf carefully, held it. "I was 16. My grandmother Adeline was showing me her garden. She had this bean she'd grown her whole life, called it her grandmother's bean, because that's what her grandmother had called it." He looked through the glass. "She died that winter. She was the last person in the family who knew it. I saved the seeds because she had told me to. I didn't know what seed saving was. I didn't know about genetic diversity or heirloom varieties or any of it." He paused. "I just knew Adeline had told me not to let it go." May looked at the jar in his hands. "Is it still viable?" "I grew it out every 5 years, last time in 2019. It's fine." He put it back on the shelf. "The first thing I ever learned about seeds was from a woman who didn't know anything about seed science. She just knew what she had, and she didn't want it to die with her." He looked at May. The science came later. The reason came first. She thought about that for a long time. The science had been what she brought to her nonprofit work. Statistics, frameworks, grant language, conference presentations. She had been working backward from the science to the reason, trying to reconstruct from data and policy recommendations the thing that Adeline had simply known from living inside it. The knowledge didn't start with science. The science was what you used to explain what you already understood from being in relationship with the thing. The agency arrived at the end of July. 2 men in a white truck with a logo she did not immediately recognize. They came up the farm road on a Wednesday morning. Elias saw the truck before she did. He watched it with an expression that was not surprise. "You know them?" she said. "I know who they work for," he said. "They parked near the barn and got out." Both professionally dressed in a way that was slightly wrong for a farm visit. Too clean, shoes that had not been on dirt before that morning. The older one had the practiced ease of someone whose job involved a lot of initial conversations with people who did not want to have them. His name was Garrett. His colleague was Pierce, who held a briefcase and said almost nothing. Garrett said they were from Agrigenesis Solutions, headquartered in Research Triangle Park. They had an interest in heirloom and heritage varieties of Appalachian origin. They had heard about Elias's collection. Elias said from who? Garrett said the agricultural research community was a small world. Said it with the smile of someone who has used that sentence before and knows it is not a complete answer. He said Agrigenesis was interested in partnering with Elias. Climate-controlled storage, a team of plant geneticists to sequence and catalog the varieties. A licensing arrangement that would allow the company to study the varieties for commercial potential, while Elias retained access to his own collection. May said, "What does licensing mean exactly?" Garrett looked at her. He had addressed everything to Elias. The granddaughter with the notebook had been backdrop until this moment. A licensing arrangement means the company holds intellectual property rights to any commercial applications developed from the genetic material, he said. Standard in the industry. Standard in the industry means, if you find a commercially valuable trait in one of my grandfather's varieties, you own it, May said. The company would own the patent on any developed application. Your grandfather would retain his seeds. He would retain his seeds, but you would own what the seeds know, she said. The traits that took generations to develop through selection. Garrett's smile remained. I think that's a somewhat simplified characterization. I think it's accurate, she said. Elias said, "Thank you for coming out. I'm not interested." Garrett said he understood. Left a folder on the porch railing. He and Pierce got back in the white truck and drove down the farm road. Elias picked up the folder, handed it to May. "Read this," he said. "Know what they actually want." She read it that evening. Agrigenesis Solutions was a subsidiary of Harlan Biotech, which was a subsidiary of one of the 3 largest agricultural conglomerates in the world. The company held patents on over 11,000 seed varieties. It had been involved in more than 140 legal actions against farmers for unauthorized use of patented seed. Most settled out of court, terms not made public. She sat with the folder, thought about what Elias had said. The science came later. The reason came first. The reason Agrigenesis wanted Elias's seeds was that his collection represented decades of natural selection in specific Appalachian growing conditions. Trait combinations that the company's breeding programs would take years and significant resources to develop artificially. Drought resistance, disease resistance, specific nutritional profiles, adaptability to particular soil conditions. The kind of traits that plant biotechnology companies paid significant money to acquire. Elias had been doing for free, without support, without recognition, what Agrigenesis would need a well-funded laboratory to approximate. She put the folder down, looked out the window at the dark barn. Then she called Tom Hartley. Tom was her supervisor at the nonprofit. He had been running the organization for 12 years. The specific combination of idealism and pragmatism that nonprofit work produced in people who survived it long enough to lead it. She explained what was happening. The collection, the company's visit, what she had read in the folder. Tom was quiet for a longer moment than she expected. "How many varieties?" he said. 47 documented. He thinks there may be more maintained informally. Not in Svalbard, not in Svalbard, not in the USDA system, not in seed savers. Another silence. "May," he said, "do you understand what you're describing?" "I'm beginning to," she said. "We need a conservation structure immediately," he said. "Multiple institutional deposits simultaneously. Legal protection preventing commercial patent filing. We need to move before agrigenesis comes back. He paused. They'll come back. They'll come back with a better offer, she said. They always do, he said. In August, she went to Gerald Purvis. She had been thinking about the co-op conversation since it happened. The man beside Gerald, nodding. The two of them categorizing her in the first 10 seconds. She had decided the response was not to argue about the categorization. It was to show something that required the categorization to be revised. She went on a Saturday morning when she knew he would be there. She brought the notebook. She sat across from him at the counter and she told him about the root cellar. Not all of it at once. She started with the Cherokee Trail of Tears bean, told him the history the way Elias had told her, not as a botanical specimen, as a living thing with a lineage. She told him about the 1969 jar and about Adeline and about what the northeast corner of the lower field did to that specific variety. Gerald listened. His expression went through several versions of itself. Elias has been keeping this since '74, he said. Since '74, 47 varieties that don't exist anywhere else. And a company from Research Triangle is interested. A subsidiary of one of the 3 largest seed companies in the world. Gerald looked at the counter for a long moment. That's Cherokee beans and October beans that families in this county have grown for generations, he said slowly. And they want to own the rights to it. That's what patent law allows, May said. If Elias signs the agreement. Gerald was quiet for a moment. He looked at her, not the same look as last time. You're not here to tell us how to farm, he said. I never was, she said. He didn't say anything after that. Just nodded once, slowly, and looked at the counter again. She didn't push. She left and drove back to the farm. 12 days later, she was checking the south fence with Elias when she heard a truck on the road. Gerald's truck. He parked and got out and came to the fence line and said, I was thinking about what you said. That bean your grandfather has. The one from 1838. It's still alive? Elias said yes. Gerald said, Can I see the cellar? They took him down that afternoon. He stood in front of the shelves for a long time without saying anything, looking at jar after jar, reading the labels. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, My grandmother grew an October bean I never thought to save. He said it with the expression of a man understanding something at a cost. Is it gone? He said. Probably, Elias said, but maybe not entirely. There are people in this county older than me. There are root cellars I haven't found yet. Gerald nodded. He looked at May. You're looking for what's still here. Before it isn't, she said. He came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. In late August, May called Daniel. She had been putting it off. Not because she didn't want to talk to him. Because she was not sure she had the language yet for what she was doing. She found the language at 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening, sitting on the porch after the barn work was done. With the mountain dark around her and the temperature dropping the way it drops in the Carolina mountains in August, sudden and real. He answered on the second ring. She told him how the work was going, the root cellar, the 47 varieties, the Cherokee Trail of Tears bean, and what the northeast corner of the lower field did to it. What she was learning about handling seeds by touch. What Elias had told her about Adeline. Daniel listened. He was a good listener. That was one of the things she had always valued about him. He asked questions that showed he was following. Then he said, This sounds like exactly the kind of primary source documentation the food systems field needs. Have you thought about writing it up? There's a journal at Cornell that would be very interested in this material. May was quiet. Or, he said, it could be a pilot program. Train community members to document their own collections. Scale it across Western Carolina. You could apply for a USDA grant through the nonprofit. She looked at the dark fields. He was saying the right things. all the right things framed exactly the way they should be framed for a grant application or a conference presentation. He understood what she was doing. He was trying to support it, but he was framing it as data, as material, as something you extracted from a place and brought back to the world of institutions and programs and presentations. He didn't understand that she wasn't here to extract anything. She was here because this was where she needed to be, not to document the relationship between Elias and his seeds. To be in it, to become someone who could continue it. "I'm not going to write it up," she said. "Not yet." "Okay," he said. A pause. "When?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe never. Maybe that's not what this is." Another pause. Longer. "What is it then?" She thought about how to say it. "It's someone handing me something they don't want to lose," she said, "and me deciding whether I'm going to hold it." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. She could hear him thinking. He was a thoughtful person. That was not in question. He was thinking about what she had said and trying to understand it. "I think I understand," he said finally. He said it in the voice of a man who understood the statement and was working on the thing behind it. "I know," she said. "That's okay. It took me a while too." September brought the harvest and the first professed whether what she had learned had actually landed. Elias said it was time for the seed selection, not just harvesting, selecting. Choosing from the harvest which seeds to save for next year. A different skill from planting. Harder in some ways because it required judgment about quality that planting did not. He watched her for the first hour. Then he said, "Go ahead, I'll be in the barn." She worked alone for 2 hours on the Trail of Tears beans section, moving through the plants, looking at each one the way Elias had shown her, choosing the strongest specimens, selecting the seeds with the most consistent color and shape, the ones that showed the characteristics that defined the variety. When Elias came back, she had 2 piles, the seeds she had chosen and the ones she had not. He looked at both piles without speaking. Then he picked up one seed from her chosen pile. He held it to the light. He said, "Why did you choose this one?" She explained. "The color, the shape, the way it had developed on the plant." He nodded. He put it down. He picked up a different seed from her discard pile. He said, "Why didn't you choose this one?" She explained. It looked slightly smaller. The color was a shade different. He held it next to the seed she had chosen. He held both to the light. "Look at these 2 together," he said. She looked. "The one you kept," he said. "See the slight indentation at the hilum?" She looked. There it was, small. She had not noticed it. "That's a stress marker," he said. "This plant grew under more pressure than average this season, maybe a water stress in July. The seed it produced is smaller and more compact. That's not a flaw. That's this variety adapting. Over time, if you keep selecting these, you're selecting for stress tolerance." He put both seeds down, the one you discarded. "The color variation, that's within normal range for this variety in this soil. That's not deviation, that's expression." May looked at her 2 piles. "I need to start over," she said. "Yes," he said. She started over. Elias sat on an overturned bucket at the edge of the row and watched without speaking. She worked more slowly this time. Picked up each seed and looked at it the way he had taught her to look. Asked herself the questions he had taught her to ask. It took 3 times as long. When she was done, Elias looked at her selection. He picked up 3 seeds and looked at them, and put them back and said nothing, which was his way of saying she had gotten it right. She stood up. Her back ached. Her eyes were tired from the close work. "How long before I can do that without making the mistake?" she said. "You'll always make mistakes," he said. "You'll just make different ones." He picked up the bucket and carried it to the barn. Over his shoulder he said, "Come back tomorrow. We have 3 more seconds." She came back the next day. And the day after that. Agrigenesis came back in September. Garrett. Alone this time. Briefcase, no cup of clig. He sat on the porch with iced tea and said the company was prepared to offer $200,000 for a 5-year exclusive research license. $200,000 was more than the farm's net income for the past decade. Elias said no. Garrett said he understood and asked if there was an arrangement that would work. He said the company genuinely valued the collection and genuinely wanted to support its preservation. "I've been preserving it for 55 years without your support," Elias said. "I'll manage." Garrett said, "You understand that without institutional backing, when you're gone, the collection is at risk." "It was always at risk," Elias said. "That's why I'm teaching my granddaughter." Garrett left. May watched the truck go from the barn doorway. She had heard the conversation. "That's why I'm teaching my granddaughter." She had come in July thinking she was there to learn seed saving as a professional skill. Something to bring back to the non-profit with an authentic personal dimension. What she understood now was different. Elias was not teaching her a skill. He was doing what Adeline had done, what the woman in Madison County had done, what the Cherokee elder had done. He was finding the person who would carry it forward, not because that person was the most qualified, not because she had the right credentials, because she was there and was willing, and was his. That was how the keeping had always worked. Adeline had not given the bean to a seed bank. She had given it to a 16-year-old boy she loved who was paying attention. Over and over, across generations, across cultures, across every agriculture that had ever existed. One person to another. The reason first, the science later. She understood now what she was there to receive. In October, Sandra Marsh drove up from Asheville. Tom had found her. She specialized in agricultural intellectual property, specifically in protecting farmers from the kind of corporate interest that agrigenesis represented. She spent 2 days at the farm, talked to Elias for 6 hours over 2 evenings, walked the fields, went into the root cellar, and came back with the focused expression of someone who has confirmed something significant. The legal structure they built was a farmer-to-farmer seed agreement. The seeds would be deposited simultaneously in 3 institutions: Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa, Southern Exposure Seed Exchange in Virginia, and a new initiative at UNC Asheville that Tom had been in preliminary discussions with for 2 years, and that this collection gave the institutional justification to formalize. Each institution would hold the material under open-source terms, available to researchers and farmers without patent restriction, specifically protected from commercial patent filing by any entity. Elias would retain his collection, retain the right to grow, select, and share as he always had. May's documentation would become the public record of the collection's provenance and growing history. The arrangement did not make anyone money, which was both its weakness and its strength. December, May had been doing the winter inventory in the root cellar. Alone, Elias was in the house. The work was moisture checks, germination tests for varieties approaching the end of their storage window, notes added to the documentation she had been building since July. She was on the 3rd shelf when she found it, a jar, mid-shelf. The moisture indicator card inside had changed color. It was supposed to be blue. It was pale green. She stared at it. Pale green meant the moisture inside the jar had risen above the safe threshold. Not drastically, but above it, which meant something. A micro crack in the gasket, a seal failure, something had let moisture in over an unknown period of time. She looked at the label. Swain County Dent Corn. The hollow adapted variety. The one the man had grown for 60 years, and that would grow nowhere else with the same vigor. The one that existed only in this cellar. She checked the log. Last germination test, 2017, 7 years ago. She pulled the jar from the shelf, held it carefully. The corn kernels inside looked fine to her eye. but she did not have the eye yet that would tell her what fine meant for this variety under these conditions. She went to the barn door. "Granddad," he came. He looked at the jar. He looked at the card. He took the jar from her carefully and carried it to the workbench near the bulb and held it to the light for a long time. "How long has it been like this?" she said. "Don't know," he said. "Could be recent, could be months." He sets the jar down. "The gasket on this one has been marginal for 2 years. I knew I needed to replace it." He paused. "I kept putting it off." She looked at him. This was the first time she had seen something that looked like regret on her grandfather's face. "What do we do?" she said. "We test it," he said, "tonight." They ran a germination test that evening, laid out 30 kernels on wet paper towels in the warmth of the kitchen. Elias set a timer. While they waited, May called Tom, told him what had happened. Tom was quiet for a moment and then said, "What's the current viability?" "We don't know yet," she said. "We're running the tests now." "If the germination rate is below 20%, Tom said, "we have a problem." "I know," she said. "If it's below 10, he said, "we may have lost it." She sat at the kitchen table after she hung up and looked at the paper towels on the counter. Elias was across from her, drinking coffee, not looking at the paper towels, looking at the window. "How bad could it be?" she said. "Could be fine," he said. "Corn stores well if the moisture hasn't been too high for too long. Could have 6 months of good germination left. Could have less." He drank his coffee. "Could be the variety is gone." The weight of that sat in the kitchen. "What does gone mean?" May said. She knew what it meant, she asked anyway. "Means the last man who grew it died in 1989, and I kept it going and now it's gone because I put off replacing a gasket," Elias said. He said it quietly, without drama, the way you say things that are simply what they are. May looked at the paper towels. "I should have checked more carefully," she said. "I've been doing the inventory checks. I should have caught it." "You've been doing them for 3 months, Elias said. "I've been doing them for 50 years and I still put off the gasket." He looked at her. "This is what it means to be responsible for something. Sometimes you fail it, not because you're careless. Because you're human and you have 50 other jars, and the gasket seemed okay enough, and there was other work to do." She said, "That doesn't make it better." "No," he said, "it doesn't. It just means it's true." They checked the test at 48 hours. 14 out of 30 kernels had germinated. 47%. Not gone, not even close to gone, but lower than healthy corn in good storage, which should have been above 80. "What does 47% mean?" May said. "Means we can still rescue it," Elias said. "If we act now." He picked up a germinated kernel carefully. "We need to grow this variety out immediately. Not next spring. Now. Controlled conditions. Greenhouse. We grow out every viable kernel we have, select the best, and refresh the stock." He set the kernel down. "And we transfer the collection to the 3 institutions immediately. This exact situation, 1 bad gasket, 1 month of inattention, is exactly why you don't keep the only copies of something in one place." They called Sandra Marsh that morning. The institutional deposits originally planned for the following spring were moved to November. Sandra made 3 calls and 2 emails, and by the end of the week there was a plan. The Dent corn grow-out happened in November in a borrowed greenhouse at the community college in Waynesville. Elias and May drove there 3 times a week to check on the plants. Gerald came once and stood in the greenhouse among the corn plants and looked at them for a long time without saying much. "This is the last of it," he said. "For now," Elias said. "By spring it won't be." The institutional deposits went to Seed Savers the following week. Southern Exposure the week after. The UNC Asheville partnership was formalized in November with a small ceremony that the university organized. Elias attended in the one dress shirt he owned, which he wore with his farm pants because it was that kind of ceremony and he was that kind of man. Tom Hartley gave remarks about the significance of the collection. A professor from the university's anthropology department spoke about the Cherokee Agricultural Society's records and how May's documentation cross-referenced with historical materials in ways that revealed the collection's lineage going back further than anyone had documented. He said several things that were true and accurate, and that framed Elias's work as an example of folk knowledge preservation. Elias stood in the back of the room and listened. May watched her grandfather during the anthropology professor's remarks. His expression was the expression he wore when the weather was doing something he had predicted and there was no point saying so. On the drive home, she said, "He called it folk knowledge." "He always do," Elias said. "It's not folk knowledge," she said. "It's agricultural science." It's just agricultural science conducted by one person without institutional support over 55 years instead of by a team of researchers with funding. Elias drove for a moment. "The name they put on it doesn't change what it is," he said. "No," she said, "but the name they put on it affects whether they take it seriously, whether they fund preserving it, whether they teach it." She paused. "Whether they protect it." Elias drove in silence for a while. Then he said, "That's why you're here." She looked at him. "Not to learn what I know," he said. "To make sure what I know gets heard by people who use language like theirs." He glanced at her. "I never could have done what you did with Sandra Marsh and Tom Hartley and the university people. That's not how I'm made. But you can do both. You can be here and do that." He turned back to the road. "That's what Adeline saw in me that I didn't see in myself. Not that I was the most capable. That I could hold the two things at the same time." She thought about that the rest of the drive. She thought about it in December doing the winter inventory, which she now did with an attention she had not had in July. Every jar, every moisture indicator, every gasket. She kept a separate log of gasket condition dates now, because the dent corn incident had shown her that the margin for error was thinner than she had understood. She replaced 7 gaskets in December. 3 of them were marginal in ways that she would not have recognized 3 months ago. The spring planting was in April. Elias and May and Gerald, who had been coming on weekends since October and learning slowly and without hurry, and making mistakes, and being corrected and coming back. They planted the south field together on a Thursday morning when the soil temperature was right. They planted in silence mostly. The work required attention, and attention left little room for talking. When they talked, it was about what was in front of them. The soil texture, the seed spacing. What the color of last year's growth had told them about this section's nutrient needs. The dent corn from the greenhouse had produced strong seed. The germination rate on the refreshed stock was 82%, better than before the incident, because the grow-out had allowed them to select from the strongest plants of the season. Sometimes the failure that nearly loses something teaches you how to keep it better than you kept it before. At noon, Elias sat on the tailgate of his truck and looked at what they had planted. May sat beside him. Gerald stood at the field's edge looking at the rows. "Next spring," Elias said. "Next spring," May said. "You'll know enough to plant this without me standing here," he said. "I'll know more," she said. "I won't know enough. I don't think enough is the goal." He looked at her. "No," he said, "it isn't." Gerald came and sat on the tailgate on the other side. The 3 of them looked at the field. "My grandmother grew an October bean," Gerald said. "I told you that." "You did," Elias said. "I've been asking around since then," Gerald said. "Asking the older farmers in the county, asking their widows." He paused, found 2 people who might still have it. Different lines, different families, but the same October bean she described. May looked at him. I'm going to visit them next week, Gerald said. If they'll let me, they'll let you, Elias said. You're from here. I'll bring May, Gerald said. Because she'll know what questions to ask. May looked at Gerald. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the field. But the sentence was there between them. She'll know what questions to ask. Not in spite of her notebook and her degree and where she was from. Because of what she had spent 9 months learning. The field lay in front of them in the April light. 47 varieties in their specific sections. In conversation with the soil they had been in conversation with for decades. The iron-rich northeast corner. The wet southwest margin. The mid-slope section with the extended growing season. Everything Elias knew was in this field. Everything May was learning was in this field. What she understood now was different from what she had come to learn. The keeping of irreplaceable things was not primarily institutional. It was personal, one person to another, over and over. For as long as there had been agriculture, the institutions mattered. Sandra's legal structure mattered. The deposits in Seed Savers and Southern Exposure and UNC Asheville mattered. They were the backup. They were the protection she had helped build. But the real thing was the person who understood why. The reason comes before the science. Adeline handing a jar to a 16-year-old boy because she loved him and trusted him, and he was paying attention. Elias teaching May the way Adeline had taught Elias. May and Gerald driving next week to visit 2 families who might still have the October bean that Gerald's grandmother had grown. The chain did not break. The chain was only people. And people showed up or they didn't, and showing up was the whole thing. The seeds did not know they were irreplaceable. They were just seeds, doing what seeds do. Waiting for the right conditions to become themselves again. The right conditions were the soil and the temperature and the moisture and the knowledge of the person whose hands opened the jar. The right conditions were showing up. May climbed down from the tailgate and walked to the northeast corner of the lower field. She crouched down and put her hands in the soil the way Elias had taught her to do it. Not testing, just feeling. The iron-rich cold dark of it. The particular give that told her the drainage was right and the biology was working and the ground was ready. She stayed there for a moment. Just her and the soil and everything it held and everything it was going to need from her for the rest of her life. That was enough. She stood up and went back to work.